He ridiculed her speech, her attire, and even her willingness to voice her opinions. Yet, she remained composed, initiated playback, and observed the legal system expose him live. Danielle Riggins, having experienced much in her 42 years, recognized inconsistencies. The citation affixed to her windshield near the community center in Macon, Georgia, wasn't simply irritating, it felt targeted. She studied it briefly, peering at the listed offense. A citation for failing to yield in a pedestrian zone was received. However, she was not in the vehicle at the time of the alleged violation. Her Honda had been parked legally in front of the building while she was inside, leading a workshop for at-risk teens. She sighed, placing the paper into her bag. Danielle dedicates long hours as a youth counselor, providing assistance to kids who'd experienced hardship and lack sufficient support. Her financial status is modest. She is far from wealthy. Her profession consumed her, and with raising her teenage daughter and guiding children who resembled her younger self, her time was scarce. A penalty like this was more than just disappointing, it significantly impacted her schedule. However, it wasn't primarily about the financial burden. It was about the underlying issue of fairness. The subsequent evening, she sat at the kitchen table with a cup of mint tea and the citation before her. Her daughter, Aaliyah, was completing homework in the vicinity. "You're really going to fight it?" Aaliyah inquired, looking up from her textbook. Danielle chuckled quietly. "Yes, I'm weary of allowing things to pass." Aaliyah reclined. "Do you believe they will truly hear you?" Danielle paused, not responding immediately. She simply gazed out the window for a moment before replying, "I don't require them to listen. I need to be present and proceed according to my conditions." The following Monday, she contacted the municipal courthouse, requested a half day away from work, and highlighted her court date in red pen on the calendar. She chose a simple outfit for the hearing: dark jeans, a light blouse, and flats. No blazer, no makeup, just her natural appearance. The woman she saw in the mirror appeared weary, but also resolute. As she prepared to leave, she placed her phone in her back pocket, activated the voice memo app, and began recording. It wasn't an expectation, but a habit formed by experience. She's learned that people sometimes react negatively when a black woman asserts herself with assurance. She reached the courthouse 30 minutes before the scheduled time. The building was a small, aged brick structure with faded signage. Several other individuals were present outside, primarily working-class people attempting to find a moment for justice amidst their jobs and obligations. Inside, the clerk called names with minimal acknowledgement. Danielle remained still, her hands resting in her lap, awaiting her turn. The courtroom felt chilly. It wasn't until she heard her name, Danielle Riggins, case 407B, that her heart began to race. She proceeded to the defendant's table, her heart steady but alert, mirroring the advice she's given to the children in her youth programs. One can't always dictate actions, but one can control one's response, she observed. And that's when she saw him. Judge Gregory Lannister. Late 50s, silver hair neatly combed back, reading glasses perched low on his nose. His reputation was well known. Some described him as firm, while others labeled him arrogant. He glanced at Danielle over the rim of his glasses, his eyebrows subtly raised. "Ms. Riggins," he stated, emphasizing her last name, "let's proceed. I presume you're here to contest this ticket, issued by a trained officer?" Danielle nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. I was inside a building, not driving, when the ticket was issued. I have witness statements available if required." He laughed, a genuine chuckle. "Naturally, you do," she replied, meeting his gaze. The judge then remarked, "You individuals frequently present narratives when appearing before the court. Always the victim. Never your fault. Let me guess. You didn't even see the officer writing it, right?" Her jaw tightened slightly. This wasn't simply skepticism. It was a more pointed feeling, and everyone in that courtroom could sense it. But Danielle remained composed, even as the atmosphere shifted. She recognized this was merely the start. Danielle did not react. She had encountered harsher remarks, both in delivery and purpose. However, hearing it from a judge in a courtroom populated by strangers carried a distinct discomfort. A heavy silence filled the room. People avoided reaction, though several eyes moved between her and the bench. Even the bailiff appeared uneasy. "Your Honor," Danielle stated, maintaining a calm voice, "I have proof I was inside. A sign-in log from the youth center. It displays my name and timestamp." Judge Lannister reclined in his chair and smirked. "You believe a log anyone can write improves anything? That's cute." A few quiet gasps arose from the back. Danielle noticed them. She also heard her heartbeat in her ears. But she remained focused. She wasn't present to be liked. She was present because she understood what was correct. "I'm simply requesting the citation be reviewed in light of the facts," she replied. "Oh, the facts," he mocked. "Well, let me tell you the facts. I've been doing this for over 20 years. I've seen all the angles. You people always want the rules bent when they don't go your way." The words landed like slaps. Not just the content, the way he said them. He treated her as if she were a child occupying his valuable time. Danielle remained silent. A response wasn't necessary. He examined her citation once more, leafing through several pages. "What is this?" he inquired. "You didn't even secure legal representation?" "No," she replied, her voice calm. "I am capable of representing myself." A brief, sharp laugh escaped him. "Naturally," he said, turning to the clerk. "Next time, we'll mandate representation. Perhaps that will eliminate the theatrics." A woman seated towards the back, middle-aged and white, holding a traffic ticket herself, noticed Danielle. She appeared stunned and visibly uncomfortable, quickly averting her gaze when Danielle's eyes met hers. Danielle paused, composing herself. She hadn't intended to confront authority, yet she wouldn't allow her dignity to be disrespected. "Your Honor," she began, carefully selecting each word, "I'd like the court reporter to read back your comments." The effect of this request was palpable, noticeably shifting the atmosphere in the room. Judge Lannister blinked. "Please repeat the last few remarks for the record." The court reporter, a young man named Vince, shifted in his chair. "Mr. Tiller," the judge snapped, "we don't have time for this. Just proceed." Danielle remained still. "Then I will replay it myself." She retrieved her phone from her back pocket. Several people in the gallery leaned forward, curious about what was about to happen. "Ms. Riggins," the judge stated, her voice now firm, "recording in a courtroom is a violation." "I recorded myself, not the proceedings," she responded softly. "It's legal in this state, particularly for personal safety." She indicated the screen. Her own voice played back, quiet and steady. Then his voice followed. Every word was audible. "You people always come in here with stories. That's cute." The statement reverberated in the room, seemingly as if the ceiling had split open. Judge Lannister's expression changed, initially showing confusion, then irritation, and finally something akin to fear. He leaned forward. "That recording is out of order," he stated. "No, sir," Danielle said quietly. "What you said was out of order." A low whistle escaped someone in the gallery, quickly stifled by a hand covering their mouth. The bailiff moved forward but refrained from touching her. He remained silent, positioned between the two, uncertain of his next action. Danielle returned the phone to her pocket. She didn't smile. She didn't appear smug. But she looked directly at the judge and didn't blink once. He lifted his gavel but didn't strike it. His eyes moved towards the court clerk, then to the bailiff. For a fleeting moment, he seemed to lose command of the room. However, the significant change didn't occur until the recess was called. That's when activity began behind the scenes. The judge announced a 15-minute recess, and the courtroom began to clear. Danielle rose, murmured, extended her limbs. Danielle remained seated. She wasn't finished. Her hands were still, fingers softly intertwined. She showed no tremor. Her composure wasn't rooted in fear. It was a calculated approach. She's worked with numerous children who were disadvantaged by systems that fail to hear them. She consistently advised them to record everything. Even quietude can serve as proof. Now, it was her turn to act on her own counsel. She retrieved her phone once more, this time to initiate a call. Danielle reviewed her contacts and selected one named Ethics Board Local, a number she had saved years earlier following a school board hearing involving one of her students. She hadn't anticipated needing it personally. A woman responded, stating, Judicial Oversight Office, South Georgia District. This is Ms. Carla Shep. How can I help? Danielle maintained a low, calm, and professional tone. Milisegon Shep. My name is Danielle Riggins. I am presently located at the Macon Municipal Courthouse, Room B. I have just experienced inappropriate conduct from a sitting judge. I possess an audio recording that potentially constitutes judicial misconduct. There was a pause on the line. I see, Ms. Shep stated slowly. Are you presently inside the courtroom? We're on recess. 15 minutes, give or take. Could you briefly describe what occurred? Danielle recounted the events accurately. Her summary contained no exaggeration, only factual details. The judge's comments, including mockery, the denial of the court reporter's request to read back the transcript, laughter, and dismissiveness were concerning. She stated, I have a voice memo of the remarks. I didn't record the courtroom, just my own audio. This is legal under state code, 16 to Order 11, 62. A pause followed, then the statement, Ms. Riggins, I'd like to escalate this to a supervising judicial officer. Can you remain in the courthouse? Her response was yes. The concluding words were, I'm dispatching someone now. Danielle ended the call, placed her phone in her purse, and released a quiet breath. She anticipated no accolades. She hadn't even expected victory, but she wasn't retreating. A young man, in his early 20s, visibly anxious and restless, approached her from across the room, waiting for his own case. Ma'am, he murmured, that was incredible. What you did required considerable bravery. Danielle offered a courteous smile. It's not bravery when it's simply the truth. He nodded swiftly and retreated. Several others glanced in her direction, not with sympathy, but with interest. Something was different. They sensed it. 10 minutes elapsed. People began returning to the courtroom. The judge was delayed. The clerk appeared anxious. Then the door beside the bench opened, but it wasn't Lannister who entered. A tall woman in her early 60s, dressed in a tailored gray suit with short platinum hair and sharp eyes, appeared. She proceeded directly to the clerk, bent forward, spoke quietly, and then looked up at the courtroom. Everyone, please remain seated, she announced. A murmur spread through the room. Judge Lannister will not be returning to the bench this morning. Danielle remained still. I am supervising Judge Merrill Vaughn, and I will be taking over this docket. She paused. Before we continue, I need to speak with Ms. Riggins privately. Please follow me, ma'am. Danielle stood, straightened her bag, and followed Judge Vaughn through the side door. The hallway felt narrow and was still. Judge Vaughn guided her into a small conference room and shut the door. I have listened to a portion of the recording, she stated without taking a seat. I'm also informed of a previous complaint against Judge Lannister. These details might support an active inquiry. Danielle remained motionless, observing her. I must ask, Vaughn proceeded, will you sign a sworn statement and present the recording as proof? Yes, Danielle responded without pause. Judge Vaughn nodded once. Unbeknownst to Danielle, her voice, recorded during a moment of quiet self-preservation, was poised to trigger events exceeding the expectations of anyone present in that courthouse. Danielle re-entered the courtroom, with Judge Vaughn immediately following. The atmosphere had noticeably changed. Conversations were subdued, and expressions were more attentive. Several individuals who had previously disregarded her were now attentive, observing her with what appeared to be respect, or perhaps curiosity. Regardless of the nature of their attention, she perceived it, yet remained composed. She returned to her seat at the defendant's table as Judge Vaughn approached the bench and addressed the court clerk. Proceeding with Case 407B, she announced, Ms. Danielle Riggins is present. Judge Lannister is officially recused pending review. The announcement settled over the room with a sharp impact. It wasn't simply a brief absence. The judge was gone, and seemingly without return. The thought remained unspoken, yet palpable. Danielle remained still, awaiting further instruction. Judge Vaughn examined the citation and Danielle's accompanying paperwork. This included the witness statement the center's login sheet, and even a timestamp text she had sent to her supervisor when she arrived that day. The judge looked up. "This is thorough, Ms. Riggins. You're clearly someone who values evidence." Danielle nodded once. "Working with young people, I've observed firsthand how things can unravel without proper preparation." There was a slight hesitation before Judge Vaughn responded. "It's a lesson more people should adopt as they mature, a subtle acknowledgement passing between them. It wasn't friendship. It wasn't sympathy, simply recognition. One woman seeing another who chose not to compromise." Judge Vaughn turned the citation over, wrote something, and gave it back to the clerk. "This citation is voided," she stated. Ms. Riggins was released. Danielle did not smile. She merely collected her belongings. However, before she could leave, the judge stated, "For the record, your behavior in this courtroom, considering the situation, was remarkable. You maintained composure and dignity despite an unfortunate series of events." Danielle then permitted herself a brief, weary smile. "Thank you," she said. She departed the room as silently as she had arrived. But the atmosphere outside was altered. The hallway was filled with a palpable sense of unease. A courtroom aide, a young woman wearing dark-rimmed glasses and speaking with a hesitant tone, softly stopped Danielle near the exit. "Are you the one who recorded him?" she inquired, her eyes widening. "I am," Danielle responded. The aide looked around before saying, "You weren't the first. But you might be the one who finally got them to act." Danielle raised her eyebrows a little. "Others tried. There have been complaints," she murmured. "But nothing ever stuck. Either no proof or no follow-through. It was difficult to gain traction until someone possessed the courage and the evidence." Danielle remained silent. She felt no need to speak. Stepping outside, she inhaled deeply. The air seemed heavier than normal, not due to the weather, but because of the events of the past hour. As she approached her vehicle, her phone vibrated in her pocket. A new voicemail had arrived. She pressed play. "Ms. Riggins, this is Agent Walt Desmond with the Georgia State Commission on Judicial Conduct. An initial recording from a Macon courthouse arrived this morning. We need to discuss a possible behavioral pattern concerning Judge Gregory Lannister. Please return our call at your earliest convenience." Danielle rested against the car door. Her intention wasn't to discredit a judge. She came to contest a traffic ticket. However, the truth unfolds according to its own schedule. And occasionally, when you voice a concern, you may inadvertently represent the interests of many others. By sundown that day, Danielle would discover the true extent of the situation. Danielle was halfway home when her phone rang again. She considered ignoring the call while driving, but the number displayed an official-looking area code for 7-8. She pulled over to the parking lot of a small grocery store in Warner Robins, parking under the shade of a faded sign, and answered, "Ms. Riggins, this is Agent Desmond. Thank you for returning the call." His voice remained calm, but was precise, a person who carefully considered words before speaking. "We reviewed the audio," he continued, "and it's clear. Furthermore, it corresponds with prior grievances against Judge Lannister submitted during the last 3 years. Your testimony could be crucial in initiating an internal ethics review that has been delayed." Danielle tightened her grip on the steering wheel with her free hand. "What are the next steps?" she asked. There was more, Desmond added. "An anonymous tip arrived this morning, shortly after your complaint was released on the internal channel. The tip contained financial records associated with Judge Lannister, including offshore transfers, unauthorized reimbursements, and a concerning pattern of rulings in favor of contractors with ties to a private law firm in Augusta." Danielle paused, visibly surprised. Could this be criminal corruption? Affirmative. And with this development, the situation extends beyond a simple personnel issue. It may involve criminal activity. She didn't respond immediately. Desmond continued, "You've already accomplished a lot. If you are willing, we might require a statement. You wouldn't be obligated to testify unless the investigation becomes more serious, and you would receive legal assistance throughout the process." Danielle breathed out, "I will do what is necessary." "Understood," he replied. "You will be contacted by one of our ethics advisors by end of day." "Thank you, Ms. Riggins. You've made more of a difference than you realize. The call concluded. Danielle remained still in her car for a few minutes, the quiet sound of far away traffic forming the backdrop. She wasn't certain whether she felt fear or power, perhaps a combination of both. She didn't share with Alia immediately, not due to concealment, but because she needed some time to process it herself. Later that evening, following dinner, as Alia cleaned the dishes, she inquired, "So, how did it go?" Danielle offered a small smile, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Let's just say I believe the judge won't be processing many more tickets." Alia grinned. "You didn't strike him, did you?" Danielle laughed. "No, darling, but I made my point." The television played the local 6 o'clock news in the background. Danielle wasn't truly paying attention until the anchor delivered news that caught her focus. Breaking. A municipal judge in Macon is currently suspended from their position while an investigation proceeds regarding claims of misconduct. These allegations include discriminatory behavior and potential ethics violations. Alia accidentally dropped a dish into the sink. "Wait, is that him? Is that your judge?" Danielle asked, slowly sitting down. "Looks like it," she replied. The anchor reported that sources verified the investigation began following a complaint filed earlier today by a local resident, an action that has now initiated an internal review of the judge's prior decisions. Financial documents, sent anonymously to the State Oversight Commission, seem to indicate connections between the judge and several private developers who have received advantages from his rulings. Alia looked at the screen, then at her mother, asking, "You really did that?" Danielle looked at her. "I didn't do all that. I just said something. The rest have been waiting to come out." Alia's face softened. "I'm proud of you, Mama." Danielle touched her daughter's cheek gently. "It's not always about being loud. Sometimes it's just about refusing to stay quiet." Her phone buzzed again, this time a text. New voicemail 1 minute long. She hit play. "Ms. Riggins, this is ADA Kendra Malloy from the Bibb County District Attorney's Office. Thank you for providing the recording. Judge Lannister was taken into custody this afternoon for questioning. Currently, the ethics violations are under formal review and criminal charges are being considered. We would appreciate the opportunity to speak further with you if you are available. Please contact me at your convenience." Danielle observed the screen, then looked up. Alia was watching her, eyes wide. "What now?" she asked. Danielle shook her head. "Now, I will call them back." Unbeknownst to her, a significant number of individuals would come forward in the days following, spurred by her resolute stance conveyed through a voice memo and unwavering resolve. Within 48 hours, Danielle's name circulated discreetly among legal offices, community groups, and even local newsrooms, not as a figure of fame, but as an emblem. She had not sought any of this recognition. She continued going to work, continued picking up Alia from school, and continued reminding the boys at the youth center to keep their pants up and their heads higher. However, things around her began to change. The first indication arrived the following week when Pastor Reuben Fields, who ran a coalition for court reform in Central Georgia, called her during her lunch break. "You don't know me, Ms. Riggins," he began, "but I've known about you since Tuesday. What you did. It wasn't insignificant." Danielle was in her car outside the community center, with a half-finished sandwich on her lap. "I didn't do it for attention." "I know," he stated. "That's why people are paying attention." He requested her to speak at a future town hall. A simple request, just a few words about resilience, about respect, about not allowing authority to dominate individuals who are not always able to retaliate. She paused, but ultimately consented. That evening, Alia assisted her in choosing her outfit. Danielle requested a simple event. Alia playfully suggested, while playfully tossing her a colorful scarf, that someone might capture the occasion for Instagram. "Might as well look unbothered and cute," she said. The town hall was unassuming, with folding chairs, plastic tablecloths, a few trays of donated cookies, and sweet tea. Danielle chose not to bring notes. She stood before approximately 50 people, hands by her sides, and spoke as if addressing one individual. "I didn't record that, Judge, because I wanted to take him down," she stated. "I acted because I'd witnessed too many deserving individuals disregarded, and I refused to suffer a similar fate," the audience acknowledged with nods. Several individuals dabbed their eyes. As she concluded her statement, the attendees rose to applaud. Subsequently, an older woman, adorned with a wide-brimmed hat and holding a folder, approached her. She identified herself as Geraldine Baker, a retired schoolteacher. I filed a complaint against that same judge in 2021. She stated, her voice gravelly but clear. They dismissed it, claiming it lacked merit. Perhaps now, someone would listen. Danielle took the folder from her hands. I'll ensure someone does. In the days that followed, Danielle received more calls. A podcast producer from Birmingham, a law student from Emory who wanted to write her thesis on ethical failures in lower courts, and a public defender in Albany who asked if Danielle would participate in a courtroom training session for junior attorneys. She declined most requests, not because she was indifferent. She simply wished to avoid having her name become a hashtag. Her goal was for the children she worked with to view her as the same woman who had taught them resume writing and guided them through difficult conversations with their parents. However, she agreed to certain requests, particularly when she understood how many individuals needed reassurance that they weren't irrational. Activity at the center increased. Contributions arrived from people residing outside of Macon. A woman in Tampa contributed 20 backpacks, along with a handwritten message, for the kids you champion and for the ones you're championing. Thank you, Danielle. Alia seemed to gain confidence, too. One afternoon, she announced, Ms. Brenner had us write in civics class about someone in our community who stood up for justice. I wrote about you. Danielle was surprised, asking, really? Alia replied casually, I was planning to choose John Lewis, but he's the obvious choice. Danielle chuckled. I don't think I'm in his league, Alia remarked. Danielle responded, I think you'd surprise yourself. What truly astonished Danielle, however, was the number of individuals who had been waiting quietly and with patience for another person to initiate action. 3 months later, Danielle was seated on the rear steps of the youth center shortly after closing time. The last of the teens had departed for the day, their laughter still resonating softly throughout the parking lot. The Georgia heat lingered, even as the sun descended, casting shadows on the fractured pavement. She took a drink from a water bottle and allowed her body to recover. It had been a demanding day and a demanding few months. She had presented at 4 panels, completed 2 interviews, and received a volume of inbox messages she couldn't manage. The investigation into Judge Lannister had expanded beyond her initial expectations. Following the release of the financial records, additional complaints emerged, not only from Macon, but also from surrounding counties. Rumors circulated suggesting the district attorney could file formal charges. The story had been featured on a national justice blog, and certain advocacy groups were now referencing Danielle's case in their training programs. However, all of that seemed secondary to what she truly prioritized. That day began with her witnessing Quentin, one of her teens, perform his debut spoken word poem at an open mic. He previously avoided eye contact. Now, he stood on stage, telling the audience, when they try to shrink you, that's proof you're already too big to fit their box. No applause was necessary. That single moment justified all the effort. While she was seated, the center's director, Mr. Lou Bailey, came outside. A large man with gentle eyes and a deliberate pace settled beside her with a soft exhale. You know, he began after a moment, most people wouldn't have acted as you did. Danielle kept her gaze forward. It didn't feel like a decision. He nodded thoughtfully. It rarely does when it's the correct action. We've seen staff depart and arrive, but I've never witnessed this place so lively. You provided these children with a unique experience. She allowed the sentiment to resonate. Occasionally, she stated, I believe I simply felt worn out, weary of holding it back. The man seemed to assume he could address me as if I possessed no value, and for a brief moment, I nearly allowed it. However, I then recalled the advice I impart to these children daily. Maintain your posture, make your voice heard, and I understood that I couldn't request that of them if I was unwilling to embody it myself. Mr. Bailey murmured a subdued, and then rose. Are you prepared to secure the premises? Yes. Please allow me a moment. Once he entered the building, Danielle gazed upwards at the sky. A few stars began to appear, dim and dispersed, yet present. She considered the individuals who had remained silent, perhaps because they believed their opinion wouldn't be impactful, or they feared negative consequences, or they were simply weary. And she understood. She genuinely did. However, someone must initiate action. That doesn't signify superiority. It simply indicates they were frustrated enough to proceed, even when the situation felt unstable. Prior to departing, she retrieved her phone and composed a brief message on her social media page, an account she hadn't accessed in weeks. The message read, "If it feels like no one sees you, speak anyway. If it feels like they don't hear you, speak anyway. You never know who's watching." After pausing, waiting for a reason to share, she posted, placed her phone in her bag, and secured the door behind her. Occasionally, bravery appears forceful, accompanied by raised fists and resounding chants. Sometimes, the path to change is not dramatic. It can be quiet, consistent, respectful, and involves simply appearing in a courthouse, even when unexpected. Danielle didn't require a platform to create change. She only needed to be present, speak honestly, and refuse to be silenced. In doing so, she not only defended herself, but also created an opportunity for Geraldine, for Quentin, for every voice that had been overlooked for too long, because authentic justice doesn't always begin with grand gestures. Occasionally, it begins with the youngest, with someone unwilling to yield. Should this narrative resonated with you, if it brought to mind someone in your life, or perhaps even reminded you of yourself, please consider subscribing, sharing it, and discussing it, as stories like this are not simply intended to be heard, but meant to be remembered. According to my mom, she works at NASA. The entire class laughed until someone with a badge entered the room and altered the atmosphere. It was a Tuesday, shortly after recess, and the classroom had a subtle scent of hand sanitizer and pencil shavings. Ms. Lawson had just finished roll call when she clapped her hands and announced, "All right, it's time for our What My Parent Does presentations." One after another, students share their stories. A father who worked as a firefighter, a mother employed a local bakery, a brother serving in the Army who was acknowledged with a round of applause, even though technically he didn't count. Next came Talia Jefferson's introduction. She rose deliberately, clutching a small index card displaying her name in purple ink. Talia was known as one of the quieter students in class. She was intelligent but preferred not to raise her hand simply to speak. She surveyed the room, making no direct eye contact, and stated distinctly, "My mom works at NASA." A pause followed. Then came quiet chuckles, escalating into laughter, not a sudden outburst, but a wave that grew stronger as confused and amused glances circulated. "Wait, NASA?" Someone called from the rear. "You mean like the space agency?" Another voice whispered, perhaps a little too loudly. Even Ms. Lawson seemed surprised. She didn't laugh. Instead, her eyebrows rose a little, as if she found it difficult to accept. Talia blinked deliberately, remaining silent and still. She didn't shout. She didn't flee. She simply stood, her expression composed, her hands unwavering. "Yes," she confirmed, stating that she works at NASA and is a systems engineer. The word seemed out of place. Ms. Lawson, positioned close to the board, offered a strained smile, signaling a transition to the next item. "Well, thank you, Talia," she said, already looking over her clipboard. Next, it was Owen's turn. Talia resumed her seat, disregarding the laughter and the subtle gestures. Her fingers tightened around the bottom of her shirt. Her expression remained composed, though her cheeks felt flushed. Owen began to discuss his dad's plumbing business, but Talia registered very little of what he said. She was certain they didn't accept her story, not a single one of them, not even the teacher. They found the task unbelievable, but even more so, they doubted the individual presenting it. A girl with deep brown skin, her tight braids secured with a soft pink scrunchie. She carried a hand-me-down backpack with a broken zipper. Her shoes were well worn, and she didn't use elaborate language or speak with great volume. Therefore, when she mentioned NASA, it sounded to them like a fantasy, like a game. During Owen's presentation, a piece of paper was passed to her desk. A boy named Theo leaned towards her, and asked if she cleaned the bathrooms or something. Talia remained silent. She didn't cry, not at that moment. As the bell signaled the end of class and students scrambled for their backpacks, she remained seated, her gaze fixed on the classroom door. She had never before wished her mom held a different position, one that was simpler to discuss, one that didn't invite curious glances. Nevertheless, even then, she held onto the conviction that it was important. Her mom had once shared with her that some truths are too profound for limited understanding. One simply allows them to mature. Talia exited that classroom with her head held high, despite a knot in her stomach. She felt no personal shame. Her concern was for those around her. However, she was unaware that the learning experience wasn't complete. This applied to her classmates and to Ms. Lawson as well. The Jefferson House was located close to a peaceful road in Mobile, Alabama. It wasn't ostentatious, but it was neat, painted a light yellow with green shutters. It was the sort of place where the porch light was consistently illuminated before nightfall, and the screen door made a slight creak upon entry. Talia entered through that door at a slower pace than normal. Removing her sneakers, she dropped her backpack close to the staircase and went directly to the kitchen. The aroma of garlic and onions indicated her mom had arrived home earlier than usual. Dr. Renee Jefferson was at the stove, stirring something in a large red pot. She didn't immediately acknowledge her. "You're late," she stated, not unkindly, simply observing it. Talia selected a chair and sat down. "Had to remain behind to clean the desks," she murmured. Renee turned, observed her daughter's expression, and adjusted the flame. Talia remained silent for a moment. Her hands rested in her lap, nervously playing with the sleeves of her hoodie. She appeared eager to speak, but struggled to begin. "We laughed," Talia said at last. Renee understood immediately who she meant. She drew out the chair opposite her daughter and sat. There were no outbursts, no displays of shock or fear. "Why? I informed them that you were employed at NASA." Renee gave a barely perceptible nod, "and they didn't believe you. One kid suggested you might have cleaned the bathrooms." Renee took a shallow breath, a momentary pause to compose herself. "And what was your response?" "You didn't offer one." Ms. Lawson quickly moved on, seemingly avoiding the issue. That action caused Renee's eyebrows to twitch almost imperceptibly, but she maintained a level tone. "Do you think you said something incorrect?" Talia glanced up sharply. "No. Don't accept their lack of understanding as your fault." They laughed. "And that's their responsibility, not yours." A moment of silence followed as the bubbling from the pot filled the space. Outside, a dog barked twice and then stopped. "You know," Renee said, rising to stir the food again, "when I first told people I wanted to work in aerospace, my high school guidance counselor told me to be more realistic. Said I should consider secretarial work." Talia looked up, eyes wide. "That occurred in 1998. I didn't engage in an argument with her. I simply ceased visiting her office." "Did it cause pain?" Renee extinguished the stove and turned to her daughter. "Yes, but also ignited a spark. I wasn't feeling anger towards her. I was resolved not to allow her to dictate who I could be." Talia smiled. Just a little. She appreciated that her mom consistently found a way to speak honestly, but not in a sensationalized way. There was resilience in her composure. "You know, I could attend your class," Renee mentioned casually. "Parent days are this Friday, correct?" Talia blinked. "You do that?" she asked. "I get the day off anyway, and it might be fun." Renee replied, "But what would you wear?" Talia's eyes lit up. Renee grinned. "I was thinking maybe my NASA badge and that black blazer you hate." Talia responded, "Okay, yeah, do that." They both laughed then, a real, from-the-belly kind of laughter. The air in the kitchen felt lighter. Renee served them both bowls of stew and set them on the table. While they ate, she shared stories with Talia about her first job interview and the time she accidentally spilled coffee on a flight simulator keyboard. The stories made Talia giggle, and she no longer felt small. She felt lucky. "Remember," Renee said as they finished, "you don't owe anyone proof. But if the moment comes when you feel like showing them, just know I've got your back." Talia nodded slowly, cheeks full of food and her badge. Renee smirked that too. She wasn't intending to simply make a statement. She aimed to transform the atmosphere of the room. Talia hadn't realized this yet. Friday arrived sooner than Talia anticipated. Throughout the entire week, rumors continued to circulate within the classroom, much like dust in sunlight. Several students attempted apologies through hesitant gestures. One offered her a crushed fruit snack. Another quietly said, "I was just joking." However, the majority behaved as if nothing had occurred. This suited Talia just fine. She hadn't forgotten. As the morning bell signaled the start of the day, the classroom was filled with excited energy. Ms. Lawson had organized the desks in a horseshoe shape, creating space for parents to be seated and present. She wore a purple blouse and had placed a tray of sugar cookies, clearly purchased from a grocery store, as a somewhat feeble attempt to create a celebratory atmosphere. Talia was positioned near the center, her backpack carefully placed beneath her chair. She felt anxious, though not frightened. It was a feeling of anticipation. She had not informed anyone that her mom would be present. The first parents arrived approximately at 9:15. This included a man wearing a mechanic's uniform, a woman in scrubs, and several moms carrying tote bags and Starbucks cups, who greeted with somewhat overenthusiastic smiles and waves. The presentation commenced, punctuated by applause and gentle laughter. One dad shared a story about repairing a sink that had unexpectedly burst. Another mom recounted her experience of teaching yoga to toddlers. Talia repeatedly looked toward the door. Precisely as Ms. Lawson began introducing the subsequent speaker, the door opened. Dr. Renee Jefferson entered the room. She was wearing the black blazer that Talia found so off-putting, perfectly tailored and crisp. Her NASA Johnson Space Center identification badge hung from a Navy lanyard, paired with black slacks and no jewelry except for a silver watch. Her expression was calm, not smug, not flashy, simply present. The room fell silent instantly. Even the air seemed to still. Ms. Lawson stammered, and Talia stood up, announcing, "This is my mom, Dr. Renee Jefferson." The teacher's eyes widened momentarily before a smile spread across their face. "All right, welcome." They gestured. "Would you like to tell us about your work?" Renee responded with a courteous nod. "Certainly. Good morning, everyone. I'm an aerospace systems engineer at NASA. I work on mission planning, flight systems integration, and operation strategy for our lunar and Mars programs." Several heads turned in the direction of Talia. A few mouths dropped open, and one student quietly whispered, "Whoa." Renee proceeded calmly. Her voice had a measured cadence, clear, smooth, and steady. "A significant portion of my work focuses on designing systems that ensure astronauts can travel safely in space. We examine all aspects, from their respiration to the transmission of data back to Earth." She paused, allowing the statement to sink in. "I'm not here to impress you," she added, observing the room. "I came here because my daughter mentioned she's spoken with you, and some of you expressed doubt about my work." Silence. Talia could hear her own heartbeat. She refused to blink. Renee approached the whiteboard and indicated a printed diagram she had prepared, a genuine schematic from a previous project. "You don't need to grasp every detail. That's perfectly acceptable," she stated, addressing the group. "But the next time you hear something that seems unbelievable, pause before dismissing it. Because innovation can emerge unexpectedly," she said, then turned to her daughter. "And when someone shares a truth with conviction, allow it to remain as it is, don't diminish it." Ms. Lawson cleared her throat. "Thank you, Dr. Jefferson. That was very enlightening." Renee smiled and walked over to sit beside Talia, who was trying not to grin. The room proceeded slowly after that. The next parent began their presentation about running a car dealership. There was no laughter, no whispering. And Talia, she sat up straighter than she ever had before. She didn't look around for affirmation. She didn't require it. At that moment, her truth resonated strongly, accessible to all present. However, many failed to recognize that the woman they had just encountered hadn't always experienced being heard. Her journey to NASA encompassed countless instances mirroring this one. Prior to becoming Dr. Renee Jefferson, she was simply Renee Lewis, a slender teenager with oversized glasses and notebooks filled with diagrams that held no interest for anyone else in her neighborhood. Growing up in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, she lived in a house with a sagging front porch, raised by a mother who worked two jobs to pay the bills. From a young age, she preferred machines to makeup. While other girls enjoyed playing jump rope, Renee constructed small devices from discarded fans and obsolete cassette players. Her uncle once described her as odd, but she viewed that as a positive attribute. At 13, she borrowed a book from the public library about space shuttles and devoured it completely in a single night. By 14, she was independently learning fundamental programming concepts. She rarely discussed this at school. She quickly discovered that expressing a desire to work at NASA would often result in ridicule or dismissal. Her educators didn't encourage her. This wasn't due to a lack of intelligence. Renee consistently earned straight A's across all subjects. Instead, they had formed preconceived notions about her future. "You'd be exceptionally organized," one counselor remarked to her. "You'd excel as a receptionist." Upon mentioning her intention to apply to a summer program for young engineers at Georgia Tech, her math teacher expressed surprise. He remarked that it was highly competitive and questioned if she was certain about spending the application fee. Despite this, she submitted her application and was accepted. That summer proved transformative. She found herself among peers who approached problem solving in a similar manner, with notebooks brimming with questions and uninhibited curiosity. She returned with a collection of blueprints and a newfound sense of purpose. College presented its own challenges. At Auburn University, she found herself one of just 3 black women within the entire engineering department. During collaborative assignments, she frequently was asked to record notes rather than work on calculations. Instructors continued to mispronounce her name, even after 3 semesters had passed. Despite these difficulties, she remained steadfast, consistently attending classes. Renee supported herself by working evenings at a diner close to campus and providing tutoring services to high school students on weekends. There were moments when she contemplated abandoning her studies. It wasn't a matter of her inability to manage the workload. The difficulties stemmed from the draining effort of constantly having to demonstrate her place. During one spring, following a successful thermodynamics midterm, she overheard 2 classmates speaking privately behind her. One suggested she must have received assistance, and the other speculated she may have copied from another student. Instead of confronting them, she didn't shed tears. She simply returned home, opened her textbook, and began preparing for the upcoming finals. By the semester's conclusion, she achieved the top rank within her department. It was an unspoken understanding amongst them, but they recognized it. Following graduation, she completed an internship at Lockheed Martin. Subsequently, she submitted an application to NASA, which she considered a long shot. However, her qualifications were undeniable. The acceptance call arrived in March while she was in a laundromat, surrounded by wet towels and with only one dryer operational. Her mother wept on the phone for a full 5 minutes. From there, the substantial effort commenced. The meetings, the designs, the late nights, the subtle glances in conference rooms, the moments where she had to repeat herself 3 times to be heard. But she persisted in voicing her thoughts, because whenever she worked at a console or drafted a fresh concept, she recalled a younger version of herself who only needed one person to believe it was achievable. Now, as she entered her daughter's 5th grade classroom, the badge swaying from her neck, she represented more than just herself. She stood for every girl who had ever been told, "People like you don't do that." However, this wasn't about proving a point anymore. It was about establishing something new in her daughter, a foundation that couldn't be undermined. The following Monday, subtle changes were noticeable, not in a dramatic fashion, but through small shifts. The shift was subtle, something you'd only perceive if you were paying close attention. When Talia entered class, she anticipated no special welcome, and none arrived, but the atmosphere felt different. People didn't visibly react when she spoke. Theo didn't whisper. In fact, he completely avoided looking at her. During recess, 2 girls, Kennedy and Samira, approached her near the jungle gym. They stood nearby, uncomfortably, shifting their weight. "My mom said your mom's speech was really something," Kennedy said, chewing her bottom lip. She seemed intelligent, genuinely so. She is, Talia answered promptly. Samira concurred. I researched NASA after school, she explained. It's quite interesting. That was their brief exchange. Yet they remained. And for the first time all year, the three of them settled on the bench and discussed a topic beyond snack trades or slime videos. Later that day, Ms. Lawson spoke privately with Talia as the class prepared to leave. I wanted to say something, she began, her voice softer than normal. Regarding last week, Talia looked up, attentive. I should have managed that situation differently, Ms. Lawson continued. I ought to have asked more questions, rather than proceeding so quickly. I apologize. Talia wasn't certain how to respond. She rarely encountered adults offering apologies in that manner. She nodded once, deliberately. That was sufficient for the present, though not everyone experienced a change of perspective. Certain children still spoke in hushed tones, but they did so with greater discretion. Some observed her with an expectation of failure, seemingly needing her to falter to reaffirm their own perspectives. One boy, Dean, would quietly say NASA kid whenever she passed, as if attempting to diminish her accomplishments. Talia remained composed. She did not react defensively or retreat. Instead, she continued her efforts. She engaged more frequently in class, volunteering answers even when uncertain of the correctness. Now, even making mistakes didn't intimidate her, not as it once had. One afternoon during group work, she overheard a classmate say, "She thinks she's better than us." Talia looked up calmly and replied, "No, I just know I belong here." No further debate followed. At home, Renee observed the change as well. Talia spoke more at dinner, sharing small details about her day without needing to be prompted repeatedly. And she began drawing again, shifting away from cartoons towards diagrams, similar to those her mother created. Rockets, helmets, star maps, and pencil. One evening, Renee discovered a post-it note affixed to the fridge. It stated, "I'm going to work there too, love, Talia." She left it untouched for 3 days. However, this wasn't solely about demonstrating assurance. A more profound shift had occurred within Talia. It was no longer a matter of disproving anyone. It was about embracing her own authenticity, recognizing truth regardless of criticism. During gym class, when the teacher requested they write down a goal not related to sports, Talia wrote, "Engineer, space missions just like my mom." When the teacher announced it, there were no laughs. The class simply listened. However, at home, a different feeling arose. It was a still moment shared between mother and daughter, solidifying all they had experienced. It was Friday night again. A full week had passed since Parent Day, and the house was filled with the aroma of Renee's renowned lemon chicken. Talia sat at the kitchen table, sketching a new design, a rotating satellite with solar panels shaped like flower petals. She worked quietly, pausing occasionally to erase or examine an angle. Renee watched from the sink, carefully drying a dish. The focused way her daughter drew, with her tongue slightly pressed against her upper lip, brought back memories of herself at 12, always constructing something in her mind. "Would you like to take a break?" Renee asked softly. Talia looked up. "Almost finished." Renee smiled, resting against the counter. "You've been working on that for 2 hours." Talia replied, "I know, I just wanted to look right." She completed the final line and showed the paper to her mom. Renee approached and examined it closely. "Explain it to me." Talia said, "Well, it's a satellite, but instead of keeping all the panels flat, they open up like this." She demonstrated the shape with her hands, so it can collect more energy when it turns, depending on the angle of the sun. Renee acknowledged with a nod, clearly impressed. "That's a clever approach. Where did that idea originate?" Talia replied, "I'm not entirely sure. I had been considering sunflowers earlier, observing how they track the sun's movement. The concept simply arose." Renee took a seat next to her, carefully placing the paper on the table. "You know what I appreciate most about that idea?" she inquired. "What?" Renee responded. "You weren't attempting to make a favorable impression. You were simply striving to resolve an issue." Talia glanced at the drawing once more. "Yes, I suppose so." They remained there for a moment in quiet contemplation. A comfortable silence settled. Then Talia spoke again, her voice gentler. "Do you think they truly believed me? After you left, Renee, placed her hand on the table. Some did, some still don't. That's not something you can always manage. So what is the solution? You continue to reappear. That's the challenging aspect. Not a single time, but repeatedly. You articulate the truth, even when it seems as though nobody listens. Talia considered that as you did. Renee offered a gentle smile, similar to the one I still offer. Was it always this difficult for you? Renee reclined in the chair, her expression thoughtful. Sometimes more so, but I stopped expecting it to become simple. Talia regarded her mother, seeing her not only as a parent, but as an individual. Someone who had overcome obstacles she hadn't even been aware of. Someone who possessed quiet strength without needing external validation. I used to wish you had a conventional job. Renee laughed, something straightforward to describe. Talia observed her mother's reaction, recognizing the discomfort when people inquired. Now, I find it quite admirable, truly admirable. Renee reached out and gently tucked one of her daughter's braids behind her ear. I'm proud of you, she said. Not because of what you said in class, but because you said it anyway. Talia felt a warmth in her chest, not just pride, but relief. A weight she hadn't noticed until it started to lift. I didn't think you were going to come that day, she admitted. Renee raised an eyebrow. Why not? She asked. I thought maybe you'd think it wasn't worth it. Renee hesitated. Then she moved nearer, speaking with a resolute and unwavering tone. Anything that impacts your self-perception is always deserving of support. Little needed to be said after that. Talia rose and proceeded to the refrigerator, took a magnet, and attached her artwork directly beside the grocery list. Renee observed her, feeling a sense of quiet contentment. Not every learning experience warranted recognition. Some simply existed, perceptible only to those who had rightfully gained them. There remained one final point to share, not directed at Talia, but for those still discovering what excellence resembles. The following week, during the morning announcements, Ms. Lawson took an unanticipated action. She presented a student submission from the Career Dreams bulletin board and read it aloud to the class. This one is from Talia Jefferson, she announced. She wrote, I want to build machines that will reach places no person has ever reached because someone must discover how to get us there, and I believe I can. There was no laughter this time, only silence. Several students turned to observe her, not with incredulity, but with something approaching respect. Talia sat at her desk, serene and concentrated, sketching miniature gears in the borders of her notebook. She didn't require a glance upward, nor did she need the room to applaud. That wasn't the focus, as this narrative was never centered on recognition. It concerned honesty, about maintaining conviction when others expressed doubt, about the significance of speaking clearly, not noisily. However, the individuals in that classroom had observed something unexpected. A woman with qualifications, certainly. Beyond that, she was a woman with a clear sense of self, someone who didn't require authorization to express herself, and a daughter who witnessed her interspaces devoid of faith and yet infused them with strength. Renee didn't need to speak loudly. She didn't need to detail her achievements. Her presence was sufficient. However, it was Talia who bore the burden of that day. She endured the flames of mockery, remained within them, and emerged stronger. It can be challenging to express self-belief, particularly when facing a lack of external validation. The core message extends beyond the nature of a parent's profession or the perceived grandeur of their role. It centers on the lessons we impart to our children, not through spoken words, but through demonstrable actions. Affirming your child instills resilience. Consistently supporting them cultivates bravery. Even a brief moment in a crowded room, standing near them, demonstrates what it truly means to be heard. When a child experiences being seen, not only by a teacher or a classmate, but by the wider world, they cease to diminish their presence. They stop doubting themselves. They begin to carry themselves with the confidence of someone who has something significant to contribute. Because they do. Talia no longer needed to persuade anyone. She wasn't waiting for the class to accept her. She had already moved forward, now concentrating on what she thought achievable. This is what makes narratives like hers significant. Because for each child who has been ridiculed, overlooked, or interrupted, there's another opportunity awaiting. A moment when the door opens, when the badge is displayed, when silence transforms into respect, and it remains with them. At the conclusion of the school year, when the class created their memory book, a page was designated most likely to. Beneath Talia's photograph, a message read, seemingly with the intention of sending something into space. She reacted with a smile, not due to the coolness of the statement, but because this time it appeared to be genuine. Therefore, the next time a child expresses a significant aspiration, refrain from immediate skepticism. Avoid limiting their potential to your current understanding. Allow them to surpass your expectations. And for parents observing this, be present, even when it feels challenging, particularly when it's truly important. Vocalize your belief in them. For more stories like this, please subscribe. These are stories that highlight true strength. Judge Holbrook and those present in the courtroom initially believed she was merely a disoriented elderly woman. However, she quietly presented her bar card and systematically refuted the case before their eyes. Do you comprehend the charges against you, or should we proceed more deliberately? Judge Morris Holbrook's tone held a barely concealed hint of amusement. He reclined in his high-backed chair, folded his arms, and looked down at the elderly woman standing alone at the defense table. His voice held the same condescension he directed at blustering defendants who believed they could best him in argument. However, this wasn't a volatile young person with loose trousers and a defiant manner. This was a 72-year-old woman wearing a pale blue cardigan and sturdy orthopedic shoes, standing upright with her hands softly clasped over a well-worn leather handbag. Alma Vernice Whitaker faced charges of obstruction, disorderly conduct, and resisting arrest stemming from a protest 2 weeks prior at Bakersfield City Hall. Leland Drury, the prosecutor, appeared to be no older than 30, presenting a polished image with shiny shoes and a demeanor suggesting unwavering self-assurance. He briefly looked towards the gallery, a slight grin on his face. A few individuals in the courtroom suppressed quiet laughter. The bailiff emitted a chuckle. A flicker moved across the stenographer's lips. Alma remained silent. Judge Holbrook struck the file before him. The document stated that he had pushed an officer and incited the crowd to defy orders to leave. Such bold claims from a person of his stature. A fresh ripple of laughter spread through the room. The judge peered over his spectacles towards her. He noted the absence of legal counsel. No attorney, I presume? She then spoke, her voice calm and measured. No, Your Honor, Alma replied, a statement that visibly startled Leland. His head angled as if he hadn't understood. Madam, are you aware this is a criminal proceeding? You are facing genuine charges. Alma did not react. I am fully aware. Would you like to see my bar card? A moment of silence followed. Then some laughter arose, people assuming she meant something else. However, Alma slowly reached into her handbag and produced a laminated card, somewhat yellowed around the edges. She positioned it carefully on the table and pushed it across. Holbrook peered, then leaned in. It displayed State Bar of California. Attorney Alma V. Whitaker, bar number 129804, was admitted on June 17, 1983. The room fell silent. She looked up and adjusted her reading glasses. I received my law degree from Howard in 1982, passed the bar the following summer, spent 12 years as a public defender in Detroit, and another 8 years working civil rights cases here in California, she stated. No one moved. I retired in 2003, she added, but I have kept my license active just in case. Judge Holbrook shifted in his seat. Drury cleared his throat, but said nothing. Alma addressed the judge directly. Before this courtroom determines my fate, I need to clarify some information. I was not organizing a protest. I was attempting to de-escalate it. There is a distinction, and I plan to demonstrate it. Point by point, her tone remained consistent. She did not increase her volume, but each word appeared deliberate and considered. The bailiff looked towards the judge. Holbrook examined her bar card once more, flipping it over, seeming to anticipate it might disintegrate. Alma remained motionless, as if she had held that posture countless times, and she had. Leland Drury then spoke, his voice slightly strained. Your Honor, we cannot confirm this without official. It's authentic, and I have additional documentation in this bag if needed, Alma stated, interrupting. Drury stopped speaking. Judge Albrook paused, then concluded very well. The court acknowledges the defendant is representing herself. He then paused. A subtle murmur, a sense of bewilderment, rippled through the gallery. But Alma Whitaker offered only a slight, almost unnoticeable acknowledgement to herself. Her purpose wasn't to provide amusement. It was to underscore that appearances could be deceiving. However, Judge Albrook wasn't prepared for the revelation she was about to unveil. The courtroom still hadn't fully settled. Judge Albrook now sat with a more upright posture, observing Alma Whitaker with a different kind of focus, one devoid of irony. Leland Drury, who previously appeared relaxed, now seemed uncertain whether he's entered a genuine trial or a trap. His jaw was tight, but his eyes repeatedly looked at the judge as if anticipating support. Alma made adjustments to the microphone before her. I'd like to begin by addressing the prosecution's claims, beginning with the body cam footage. Or more specifically, the lack of it, Leland said. Your Honor, the official report indicates the footage from Officer Grunwald's body camera was deemed irrelevant because of a battery malfunction. This malfunction occurred precisely from the moment the officers arrived at the protest until I was placed in cuffs. She turned slightly toward the jury. It's a significant gap in the record, isn't it? She moved slowly, considering her words, much like lawyers sometimes do. However, this wasn't a performance, it was a genuine issue. According to the arrest report, 3 officers were involved, she stated. Only one officer's body camera footage was examined. The second one had malfunctioned, and the third officer's footage was, what did the report indicate? It wasn't uploaded due to an administrative error. She paused before the jury box and folded her hands. However, the report did include complete transcripts of what I purportedly said, without any accompanying audio. Judge Albrook turned to Drury. Mr. Drury, is that an accurate representation? Drury cleared his throat. We presented the available materials, Your Honor. The lack of video recording does not invalidate the officer's testimony under oath. Alma didn't wait. Then we should discuss that testimony. Officer Grunewald stated I raised my fist, shouted push forward, and resisted arrest by locking my arms with another protester. I have provided 6 witness statements contradicting this. Each witness was present. They all confirm I positioned myself between the crowd and the police and requested people to move backward. Drury retrieved a folder from her bag and placed it on the table. She also stated a request had been submitted for a subpoena of Officer Grunewald's prior complaints, noting there were 3 related to misconduct during public gatherings, all of which had been dismissed quietly. A ripple of reaction passed through the gallery. Drury raised an objection. She questioned the relevance, asking if the complaints had resulted in a conviction. Alma turned, her voice firm, asserting that a pattern of behavior matters, particularly when it's the same behavior repeated. The judge raised a hand to quiet the room. Please focus, Ms. Whitaker. She nodded once, then presented a second document. I also want to discuss the photograph the prosecution introduced as evidence. Exhibit C, the image depicting me mid-step, encircled by police officers. She displayed the printout. The prosecution asserted this indicated I was advancing towards the officers, seemingly ready to oppose arrest. However, if you examine it closely, she provided a magnified copy to the clerk. You'll observe my palms are raised, open, directed outwards. This is a widely recognized gesture of de-escalation. She looked at the jury again. One doesn't approach armed police with raised hands unless attempting to avert a greater harm. The room was silent. There was no laughter now. Even the gallery had leaned forward. Drury attempted to regain control. Despite those gestures, the defendant disregarded a legal instruction to leave. Alma turned to him slowly. What legal instruction, Mr. Drury? The arrest record details an order issued by Officer Grunwald at 6:32 p.m. A time-stamped photo demonstrated that I was already in restraints by 6:28. She paused, allowing that information to register. This suggested the order was either issued belatedly or wasn't given at all. Judge Hallbrook moved, appearing noticeably uneasy. Leland remained silent. Alma inhaled deeply. Therefore, considering the absence of audio recordings, the conflicting timeline, the missing video, and the testimony that disputes witness accounts, what remains to support prosecution? She did not appear self-satisfied. She expressed no sense of triumph. She seemed weary. Weary, as if she's faced this scenario countless times and understood the process intimately. Alma then introduced a surprising element, video evidence that fundamentally altered the case. She placed a small USB drive across the table, explaining that it contained footage recorded by a college student, Victor Ramirez. He had been filming from the second floor of the parking garage, overlooking City Hall. I've already submitted it to the clerk for review, Judge Hallbrook observed. What does this video depict? Alma responded directly. The clerk placed the drive into the court screen system. A grainy yet stable video appeared on the monitor. It showed the protest happening below. People were shouting and holding signs, while police officers created a barricade. Then, Alma became visible, her small figure moving through the crowd. She was not shouting. She did not raise her fists. She did not link arms or chant. She was waving her hands down in a motion recognizable to anyone who had previously broken up a fight. Back up! Her voice rang out, surprisingly loud and clear for a woman her age. Don't push, stay calm. The video captured the entire incident. She positioned herself between two officers and a group of teenagers holding cardboard signs. She faced the crowd, not the police. Her hands were raised, again palms outward. Shortly after, one officer lunged. Another joined in. They seized her arms, pulled her backward, and placed handcuffs on her. She offered no resistance. She displayed no reaction. The room was completely silent. Following an additional 30 seconds of footage, the screen faded to black. Alma addressed Judge Hallbrook. The officer's report stated that I charged the barrier, urging others to defy. However, in that video, I was the sole individual attempting to prevent the situation from worsening. That video was not presented by the prosecution, despite Officer Grunewald's knowledge of its existence. According to information, Victor provided a copy to the department the day following the protest. He received no response. Hallbrook glanced at the bench, his jaw tense. Mr. Drury was asked, "Did your office receive this footage?" Leland Drury's face appeared pale. He stated, "I was not informed, Your Honor." Alma did not look at him. It wasn't necessary. Mr. Ramirez reported that he provided it to a plainclothes officer, who informed him it wasn't required. He speculated that they had already determined their version of events. A woman in the gallery murmured, "Lord have mercy." The judge's gavel fell once, a gentle sound intended to restore order. He regarded Alma as if encountering her anew. "You stated you retired in 2003? She affirmed, "That is correct." Following 20 years of observing cases similar to this, he inclined his body forward. "And why return now?" Her tone became gentler. "Because I grew weary of awaiting another person's concern." She advanced several steps, not for effect, but because remaining seated was no longer possible. I had hoped that if I simply adhered to the guidelines, remained quiet in retirement, read the paper, and offered occasional assistance, perhaps the world would resolve itself. However, the reality is that Mr. Drury's actions aren't unprecedented. Officer Grunewald's behavior isn't new. This pattern, this tendency of accusing first, investigating later, that's not a recent development. I'm familiar with it. I've observed it since I was 30 years old, and it hasn't diminished. She addressed the jury, her gaze sweeping across the panel. I didn't come here today to create a spectacle. I am here because if this court determines my guilt relying on the testimony of individuals who are not entirely truthful, then what becomes of the next person lacking supporting evidence, or a recorded statement, or the courage to come forward? There was no response. Even Drury had become completely still. Judge Hallbrook leaned back slowly in his chair, but just as the situation seemed as dire as it could be for the prosecution, Alma brought the room to a complete standstill. Alma reached into her handbag once more, carefully and deliberately, and produced a folded document. It appeared unassuming, lacking a prominent legal stamp or highlighted sections, simply a standard police transcript printed on regular letter paper. "I'd like to read something into the record," she stated calmly, from Officer Timothy Bragg, who was present that afternoon but not called as a witness. Judge Hallbrook scrutinized her. "Was this statement presented to the court prior to today?" Alma responded, shaking her head once. "It was not. I received this document yesterday through a records request. The process was challenging and required me to call upon a few previous obligations." She flattened the paper and began reading. "I arrived on scene at approximately 6:15 p.m. I observed Alma Whitaker moving through the crowd, repeatedly telling people to step back and remain peaceful. I did not witness her push, shout aggressively, or instigate. When I saw her being taken into custody, I was surprised, as she was the only individual I observed attempting to calm tensions." She glanced upward, allowing the quiet to linger. Leland Drury adjusted his position in his chair. His fingers momentarily played with a pen. "That officer was not involved in the arrest. Does that mean his account is unreliable?" Alma completed his thought, her voice now more pointed. "Then why wasn't his name mentioned in the witness list provided by your office? Not even as an addendum. You state your pursuit is of the facts, Mr. Drury, yet the facts that dispute your narrative are discreetly omitted." The judge asked, "Mr. Drury, can you confirm whether Officer Bragg was interviewed during the investigation?" Drury paused. I'd have to check the original intake file." "There's no need," Alma stated. "I verified. He submitted his statement the night of the arrest. It was signed, time-stamped, and remained unreviewed, unmentioned." She approached the jury once more. "This case was never about disorder. The aim was to make an illustration of an individual who appeared harmless but refused to conform." She indicated softly towards the screen, which remained dark from the preceding video. "They hadn't anticipated someone like me would speak. And after I did, they attempted to characterize me as disruptive. That term is employed when people are reluctant to acknowledge their discomfort with being questioned." A juror, a man in his 60s with a neatly trimmed beard, massaged the bridge of his nose and glanced downward. The others watched Alma intently, their attention complete. Judge Hallbrook appeared weary, not due to Alma, but because of the situation unfolding before him. "Your Honor," she spoke quietly, "I request that all charges be dismissed based on procedural misconduct, incomplete evidence submission, and the suppression of exculpatory testimony." The judge remained silent for a moment. He clasped his hands and looked at the bench, tapping one finger in a steady beat. The courtroom held its breath. Alma remained silent. It wasn't necessary. Eventually, Hallbrook raised his head. "I will consider the request and reconvene following a brief pause," he stated. Alma acknowledged his words with a nod and returned to her place. Her hands were firm. There were no written notes, no additional legal representatives, no elaborate ceremony, only years of practice, and a resolute conviction that truth held significance, even when others were unwilling to acknowledge it. As the courtroom cleared for recess, Leland Drury hesitated before rising. He remained in his seat, appearing as someone who had just understood they'd brought a spoon to a gunfight. When Judge Hallbrook attempted to regain control of the proceedings, Alma took an action that quieted the entire room. Upon resuming, the atmosphere had noticeably changed. The laughter and knowing comments had disappeared. Even those in the gallery sat more upright and silently, as if drawn into something more serious than anyone anticipated. Judge Hallbrook returned, his face grave. The gavel struck once, a gesture seemingly perfunctory, and then Alma rose. She avoided legal terminology and refrained from raising her voice. She simply began to speak. "There was a period," she started, "when I would hurry into courtrooms carrying 20 case files, often repeating the same suit 3 times a week due to financial limitations. This occurred in 1987 in Detroit at the public defender's office on East Grand Boulevard." Her voice remained steady, yet it carried an underlying sense of weight. "I recall representing a 17-year-old, Ronaldo Briggs, who had been arrested because he fit the description of a purse snatcher. He was on his way home from school, carrying a trumpet case. The officer stated that he appeared nervous. One understands what nervous signifies when you are young, black, and walking alone. The courtroom was silent. The prosecution presented no purse, no eyewitness testimony, and no confession. The only evidence was that he attempted to flee when two officers emerged from an unmarked van. I paused, allowing my statement to resonate. The legal proceedings lasted 5 weeks. For 5 weeks, I sifted through evidence that others had discarded. I found a receipt for a school lunch inside his backpack, showing a timestamp 10 minutes prior to the crime. The police were dismissed from the case. By then, however, Ronaldo had missed his final band competition and lost his scholarship. Not to inflict blame, but to offer a tangible and lasting message. Cases like his remained with me, not because they were unusual, but because they occurred frequently. Too frequently. She inhaled deeply, centering herself. Do you believe I am here today because I enjoy conflict? Because I long for the extended hours and limited tolerance common in courtrooms such as this? She addressed Judge Holbrook, her tone calm. No, Your Honor, I am here because an unacceptable number of individuals like Ronaldo do not receive a second opportunity. Had I remained silent, had I simply departed when the protest began to escalate, another child might have occupied this seat, a child unable to advocate for themselves. She moved nearer to the bench. I'm weary of feigning that quiet ensures our security. Holbrook's hands were now clasped, his knuckles pale against the wood of the bench. He remained silent. He appeared as though he desired to speak. Alma redirected her gaze toward Drury. You're young? She asked him without harshness. Perhaps you still believe the system is equitable until demonstrated otherwise. However, that's inaccurate. The system is imperfect until someone insists on something superior. That's the duty. If you are unwilling to accept that responsibility, then this is not the appropriate venue, Drury said, his face reddening. He remained silent, unable to answer. Alma went back to her place. The quiet persisted. After a minute, Judge Holbrook made a sound as he cleared his throat and looked toward the clerk. But first he touched his forehead, as if the past was suddenly heavy upon him as well. He began to speak, then stopped. This wasn't for effect. It was simply a moment of hesitation. He appeared, for the first time in years, like a man questioning the words before him. I have examined the evidence presented by the defense, he stated finally, referencing the witness video, the police transcript, and the timing discrepancies. His voice faltered but subtly. This case was not managed appropriately, and it is the court's view that proceeding would be unfair. The courtroom was utterly silent. Ms. Whitaker, he said, his tone now more strained, this court dismisses all charges. A hush fell. There were no cheers, no vocal reactions, just a stunned silence, as if people were waiting for direction on how to respond. Alma did not smile. She closed her bag, rose, and nodded. This was not a gesture of triumph, but of respect. At that moment, Judge Holbrook, for the first time in years, found himself speechless. Within the courthouse, the sunlight streamed in, bright, dry, and sharp, much as it always did in Bakersfield around noon. Alma descended the courthouse stairs deliberately, not due to any physical weakness, but because she understood the value of savoring significant moments. She held her handbag securely beneath one arm, the soles of her shoes making a quiet sound against the pavement. Journalists waited expectantly on the sidewalk, their cameras already recording, microphones extended like lures. Many of them hadn't been present when the trial commenced. News had circulated regarding the retired black woman who entered the courtroom unaccompanied and emerged with the truth. Ms. Whitaker, are you considering legal action against the city? Did you anticipate the case's dismissal? Do you identify as an activist? She remained silent, not to evade attention, but because she had already spoken her piece, and that courtroom had been her sole intended audience. A small group of people waited for her at the foot of the steps. They weren't journalists. They were younger, late teens, perhaps early 20s, wearing hoodies, carrying backpacks, and sporting worn sneakers. Alma recognized one of them as Victor Ramirez, the student who had filmed the video. He kept his phone lowered, no longer recording, simply observing her. A young woman moved forward. She appeared to be just out of high school, her eyes bright and nervous. "Ms. Whitaker," she said, I hope to be a lawyer someday, like you." Alma smiled for the first time all day. She offered a small smile, indicating her attention. The girl continued, "That was the first time I saw someone actually win in court like that. You didn't just fight. You taught." Alma met her gaze directly. "Then remember what you saw, because it won't always look that way. Most days it'll feel like pushing a brick wall uphill with your bare hands, and no one will applaud you. But you push anyway." Victor then spoke. "The system had never anticipated someone like you possessing the ability to retaliate." "I understand," she replied softly. "They relied on it." A different boy interjected, "Could we learn from you? Perhaps by observing you closely, or conducting an interview, or something similar. You've witnessed events we've only read about." Alma surveyed the group, hesitating. She didn't aspire to be anyone's rescuer, yet she detected something within their gazes she hadn't observed in a considerable time. Hope intertwined with impatience. That familiar intensity. She straightened the handle of her bag. "I avoid social media platforms. While I don't maintain a website, I still retain the ability to teach. Please bring your questions, and I'll provide the coffee." The group responded with quiet laughter. Victor's eyes lit up. Behind them, Judge Holbrook stood at the top of the stairs, observing everything. He was not accompanied by deputies at this time. He wore a blazer and a loose tie instead of a robe. For a brief moment, he seemed poised to speak, but then he remained silent. He observed Alma disappear around the corner with the children, her form gradually diminishing in the late afternoon sunlight. Returning inside, Leland Drury remained at his desk, his case file spread out but unexamined. His demeanor had altered. The usual self-satisfaction was absent. The characteristic severity softened. He looked at Alma's bar card resting on the bench, momentarily overlooked. Then he reached for it, not to challenge it, but to review it. That name, that date, that accumulation of experience. The courtroom stood deserted now, yet something had changed within him. Perhaps not enough to alter everything immediately, but potentially enough to make him reconsider in the future. For the first time, he had witnessed the distinction between winning a case and truly comprehending justice. However, what Alma subsequently conveyed to those kids provided them with something beyond legal counsel. It offered them a foundation for hope. The diner on Union Avenue was nearly empty when Alma sat down with the kids that evening. She selected the booth by the window, the very one she'd occupied years ago when she used to meet with apprehensive clients who lacked confidence in courtrooms. The light from the setting sun illuminated the worn leather seats and transformed the Formica table a warm, golden hue. Victor requested coffee, despite not typically consuming it. The young woman, identified as Kenya, asked for iced tea and retrieved a notebook, already filled with notes. The remaining individuals positioned themselves closer, as if witnessing a solemn event. Alma didn't begin a lecture. She stirred her cup deliberately, then remarked, "You know the first thing they teach you in law school?" Victor blinked. "The Constitution?" She smiled faintly. "No, they teach you how to read a case file without getting emotional, how to separate the fact from the feelings, how to argue without letting it get under your skin." Kenya leaned forward. "Is that a good thing?" "It's necessary," Alma said, "but dangerous, too. The tendency to overlook the individuals behind the data can be insidious. It's easy to lose sight of the human element." She paused, setting her spoon down and meeting their gazes. "Remember the people." A quiet stillness settled over the group, not awkward but contemplative. One of the boys, previously silent, then voiced a question. "But how does one continue when there's no audience?" Alma released a slow breath, feeling the gravity of that inquiry. "You persist because occasionally someone is paying attention. They will only grasp the truth if it's spoken aloud, even when your voice trembles, even when the atmosphere chills." Kenya jotted notes rapidly in her notebook, but Alma countered, "Don't record this. Experience it. Make errors. Botch it, but maintain your integrity." Victor reclined in the booth. "Do you ever question it? Remaining engaged for this duration?" Alma hesitated. Her fingers followed the edge of her cup. The loss of each client who deserved to be released weighed on me. Witnessing officers fabricate stories without hesitation caused me regret. And observing juries prioritize ease over honesty often made me question the value of my efforts. She paused, gazing out the window, but then I recalled the individuals who were ultimately freed, those whose voices were amplified, those who contacted me 5 years later simply to express gratitude. That is what truly holds significance. Victor nodded thoughtfully. Alma concluded her coffee and rose. The check had already been taken care of. Kenya had discreetly placed the bills beneath the sugar jar. Standing outside on the sidewalk, the children paused, seeming reluctant for the evening to conclude. Alma addressed them. Do you want to change the system? They affirmed. Then don't merely study it. Challenge it. Pose more insightful questions. Confront the absence of discussion. Engage your intellect. Utilize your mobility. Employ your writing. And when someone advises you to wait your turn, inquire as to their reasoning for believing it's not your turn already. Kenya wiped her eyes. The others remained silent, observing her intently. Then Alma spoke a final statement. I'm not a hero. I'm just someone who refused to be quiet. Following this, she proceeded towards the bus stop without turning back. Some stories transcend sensational news. They serve as reminders. That authority isn't consistently found in ceremonial garments or official positions, nor does it originate from the most vocal individual. Occasionally, it originates from a woman wearing a cardigan, managing the system as if she's performed this task previously. Because she has. When people inquire about the appearance of justice, they should recall her name, Alma Vernice Whitaker. If this story resonated with you, please share it with someone who would benefit from hearing it. And if you agree that wisdom isn't dictated by attire, please subscribe to hear more authentic stories that help us understand ourselves.